God can heal what we are willing to reveal.
Welcome to Table Talk, a 12-step journey with Nick Robinson.
Welcome back to the conversation. I'm Nick Robinson, joined by Rick Lanham as we continue our Table Talk series about 12-step recovery programs and being in recovery, what it means, who it is for. Again, I just want to remind you, our goal here is to help reduce stigma, also to learn about the process, and to help people know how to care for one another, but also maybe to say yes to recovery if that's somewhere that you find yourself in this season. We are now on step number 5, and so let's just get right into it. Rick, what is step number 5?
Step number 5 is we admitted to ourselves, to God, and to another person the exact nature of our wrongs.
Now, Rick, that sounds heavy.
It's intense. It is.
Okay, so walk me through this process. So there's a few words in this that stand out to me. One is that we admitted to God, ourselves, and to another. So this isn't like choose your own adventure. You just can talk to one person. There's 3 people here that you're dealing with, and then the exact nature of our wrongs.
Yeah, there's 3 parts.
Okay.
But there's also a bigger part.
Okay.
And this is actually my favorite step.
Okay. Yeah.
This is a milestone step on several different levels. Because as we built to this spot, this place in the 12 steps, whenever you go to a 12-step meeting, there's always this thing kind of at the end of the meeting where you'll hear this phrase, keep coming back, it works if you work it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. You know the phrase. The other phrase that you say is, stay until the miracle happens.
Okay.
And this is the step, in my personal opinion, and lots of people that I've talked to over the years would agree. This is where the miracle really does happen. And, we've talked about where does the literature come from, where does the material come from for the big book of AA, mm-hmm. which is where the 12 steps come from. And it comes from primarily the book of James, Sermon on the Mount, 1 Corinthians, and other places throughout Scripture and the Bible. But I always say I've got the big book that I go to, and I've got the good book that I go to.
Yeah.
But in James 5:16, it says, confess your sins to one another that you may be healed. And so this confession step 5, first thing I've got to do is I've got to be real with myself. So I admit to myself, which we've done that as we've worked through steps 1 through 4. I finally get to where I admit to myself what I've done.
Yeah, and some of those earlier steps were just admitting things like my life is unmanageable, which is a little bit more general than this step. This step is exact nature of your wrongs.
Right. Well, and we talked about the fact that, you asked me the question, is it possible to work steps 1 and 2 and not do any action? Well, yeah. Uh-huh. Which is then, as Lacey said in episode 3, or the third step, is then, having come to that realization in 1 and 2 discovery steps, I have to turn my will over. That's an action step. Yeah. Then the other step 4 was I make a list. Mm-hmm. Well, that's kind of an action step. Yeah. In step 5, now I'm getting eyeball.
Yeah, these are external action steps.
Yeah. So then I admit it to myself. Then I admit it to God. Now I'm looking you straight in the face, and I'm making a confession. I've got a brother that's right mm-hmm. there with me, and I'm saying, okay, Nick, here's my gory stuff. I'm confessing to another person, and I'm unloading it. And every faith system, every religious system, everything that I've ever studied in all of my religious studies programs throughout the years, there's a confession. It happens in Buddhism, it happens in in Catholicism, and it happens in there's a, not just in James, but even Paul in Galatians 6:1 says, bear you one another's burdens in love, and so fulfill the law of Christ. So there's always this confession thing, and all of a sudden in telling that story, it comes off my chest. It's like somebody says, the albatross has been lifted, or the animal has come off my chest, and there's a freedom that comes with this. And there's another thing that happens in most meetings. I've been at meetings all over the country. I go to town someplace, I pull up and look and see, I get on my phone for an AA locator. I go to a meeting. At the end of the meeting, they read the 9-step promise. And it starts off with, if we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we're halfway through. Well, halfway is 6 out of 12 steps. So I finished step 5. I'm amazed before I'm halfway through because the healing started. Yeah. Well, the healing started when I admitted the nature of my wrongs. I admitted to myself, I admitted to God. I finally told somebody, and because I'm not living in secrecy anymore. I've pulled off the mask. I've quit hiding behind whatever. I've admitted this wake of disaster. It looks like I'm not hurting anybody but myself. But the fact of the matter is, I was lying to myself, and I was leaving a disastrous trail behind me. It was affecting the people at work. It was affecting my family. It was affecting my marriage. It was affecting my finances. All that unmanageability that was happening to my family, to myself. Unmanageability. Everybody in my life was adapting and adjusting to the chaos that was called Rick.
Yeah. Well, and that's when the way you phrase that, like the chaos that was called Rick, because in these steps, reading through them in this book, they're taking the focus even off of the alcohol or the drug or the shopping or the eating or the whatever the addiction is towards that you're in recovery for, and placing it really deeper than that in the self. It's really about like your needs and how are you managing your emotions. And I mean, there's a lot of, it's not about the drug, it's about me. And it's working on me, not working on just not drinking this thing or not using this thing.
Well, whatever the addiction is, it's when I'm in full addiction mode, my brain is all about me. And now, guess what? I get it beyond whatever that substance is, whatever that schema thing is that's consuming my mind. And guess what? It is all about me. But I have to make it about getting rid of the me and dumping it all on this table and saying, here, Nick, help me look at this me. Yeah. I confess this is the me. I mean, there's an old cartoon character that we used to watch as a kid. It's called the Tasmanian Devil. It spun really fast like a tornado. Have you ever seen what's left behind a tornado? It's a disaster.
Absolutely.
And I have to take responsibility and go, this is the disaster that Rick left. Now, Nick.
And it's Rick, not the substance or the whatever. It is Rick.
Absolutely. It's not the drug or the alcohol or the shopping or the pornography. It's Rick that left this. And I have to take responsibility and tell you about that.
So I want to ask a question about practical things here. Like, okay, so it says to another human being. What other human being am I admitting this to if I'm on this step?
Somebody I trust.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not just going to pick some Jim Dandy off the street and go, hey, let me tell you my life story. Oh. It's going to be 9 times out of 10, it's going to be my sponsor or a pastor, a friend, somebody that I really trust.
So how do you know what to talk about? How do you know which wrongs to list? Like,
it's going to come off that list that I made in my step 4.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's the reason that these steps exist in the order that they do. So when I've done that step 4 and it says made a list, fearless and searching moral inventory. Yeah. So when I've done my searching and fearless moral inventory, which mine was longer than it needed to be, my step 4 was, let's compare it to NCAA grid. It's 64 teams. And I took it in and I had this list. My sponsor, who I trusted implicitly, was wise enough, had the discernment enough to go, Rick, you're being a little hard on yourself. Your anger and your anger and your bitterness or your rage are similar, and your impure thoughts and your lust are the same. So all of a sudden, the 64 became 32, and some of those things then combined down to sweet 16. And pretty soon, then all of a sudden, it became 8 things. But there were stories attached to that, and he helped me realize that some of those stories really needed to be talked about, and I had to get rid of. So there were some things that I really had to talk about, some things that I really needed to share with him, and in the telling, man, I was set free.
Yeah.
And
so
there
this is
were a couple of things that I still had in my pocket.
Yeah.
I have to confess, there were a couple of things, and so after that, there's a little suggestion in the book that says, after you've had this conversation, go home, take an hour, 2 hours, rest, and think, pray, reflect. Don't like, oh, I'm so glad that's over. Let's go have pizza. Let's just go. Because it's heavy. I mean, this is a turning point that you take some baggage that you've carried around for a long time, things that you say, I'm going to take this to my grave.
Yeah.
No, you're not, because you're only as, we have this other phrase, we're only as sick as our secrets. So I called him back and I said, there's one thing I left out. It's one little secret that I held in my pocket. Yeah. And so we met again, and I told him, I'm not going to tell you what it was.
That's okay. Yeah, that's at the step we're on right now here.
So,
but this doesn't sound like a short conversation. This sounds like something that could take a while, maybe even happen over days, and happen again. We've talked about on this journey that it's not always just a straight line. You might come back to some of these things too.
Sure.
Well, let's pause there and let's bring out today's guest. We're going to take a short break and we're going to bring back today's guest and we're going to talk about his experience, especially with step number 5.
All right.
Yeah, we'll be right back.
Sounds great.
Step 5 transforms shame into grace.
Welcome back as we continue our conversation on step number 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. Our guest for our next segment is Jolie. Jolie, our first question for every guest here is, why did you say yes? Why did you agree to be here?
Well, so I said yes because I was taught that when I came into the 12-step recovery program, that when someone asked me to give back to the program or to help with recovery, I was to never say no. But also, it's an honor to come here to not only talk about step 5, but talk about my higher power, which I choose to call Jesus, and what he's done for me through working through this step 5.
Yeah, so it's baked into the system to say yes to helping other people, which is, I imagine, has all kinds of benefits, because if you can help someone else, that gives you value. It also provides the actual help for the next person and helps build a healthy system of mutual caretaking, but also because Jesus is doing something in your life, and you want to talk about that too.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for that. So for you, one of the things I'm always curious about is, like, what was the challenge of this step? What was hard about step number 5 for you?
So the challenge of this step, and it's basically the whole basis of my alcoholism and drug addiction, was the embarrassing, sick, immoral things that I'd done as a young boy before I even found alcohol or drugs. Okay. And that's I call it a root cause analysis. Most alcoholics and addicts have that same similarity of embarrassment, shame, guilt, remorse, and until we put pen to paper and write those down and admit them not only to another person but to God, we stay bondage with those. It's like the old phrase, the monkey on my back, and really it's just Satan. He uses those against us to say, hey, you're doing better now, but remember when you did this, and he wants to go back to that.
You're still that person. You can't fix that. You're still stuck in it.
Yeah, and he just wants you to repeat the process so you can stay batting for his team instead of Team Jesus. Satan wants you to be with him, and I didn't even know that. I was raised in church as a kid and everything, and my dad got sick with leukemia when I was about
Okay.
12 years old, and my family were all praying, and the pastors were praying, and God still took him anyways, and I didn't know the thing of Thy will be done and God's will, and I always wanted to use God as a genie, and I expected Him to give me the things that I asked Him for. So when He took my dad anyway, I just ran.
Okay.
I ran away from God and the church, and I didn't even know that I was running. And until I stayed. I started drinking when I was like 13 or 14, and I stayed drinking until I was like 43 or 44.
Okay.
So 30 years worth of trying to drink to get rid of those feelings that I felt, and I didn't know how to get better until I found a 12-step recovery program.
And so 30 years is a long time.
It is.
And it didn't work.
Right.
30 years of chasing that. But then something happened when you found the 12 steps and it started working better for you.
Absolutely. So once I went to my very first meeting over in Rushville, Indiana, and I was down in the basement of a church, and I met an older gentleman there who he's no longer with us, and he actually ended up being my great-grand sponsor. His name was Ivan, and I just looked at him and I said, Ivan, how long have you been sober? And he said 40 years, and I kind of snickered, and I was like, that's impossible for someone to be sober that long,
Yeah.
And so I went to that meeting. I ended up reading the ninth step promises that Rick talked about that night with tears rolling down my eyes, because as I read those promises, I thought there's no way possible these can come true for someone like me.
Yeah.
And so I was enrolled in IOP at Terror Treatment Center at the time, and about 14 days into this program, I had a counselor there that I loved dearly, and she told me the truth about myself. And kind of in a loving way, but kind of not. But
Okay.
it was in a way that Jolie needed to hear it,
Yeah.
because I saw steps 4 and 5, and I told myself, there's no way I'm doing those.
Yeah.
There's no way I'm going to tell somebody the dirt of my life,
Yeah.
And she politely told me that if I didn't do those things, and if I didn't get a sponsor, that I was going to drink again and probably die.
Yeah.
So she told me the truth about myself at a very early stage in my sobriety, and in fact, she told me that you're not even sober yet. You're just not drinking because you haven't applied yourself to any of this stuff.
Wow.
And so that's what I needed, So I'm very grateful for her. She has since gotten Alzheimer's, and I don't know if she's even still with us today, but I told her that I was grateful for her, and so that's kind of where my journey began. And so I met a guy at that meeting I was talking about in Rushville, and he told me if I needed anything, call him. And at that point, I didn't know what he meant. And so I remembered having his number, and when I left IOP that night, I called him, and I told him what she said, and he laughed, and I was like, well, that's not very nice, But so I did end up asking him to be my sponsor. He still is, and I ended up growing up in his grandparents' home, and I found out that he attended church where I attended as a kid. So very early on in my sobriety, this was a blessing for me because I saw God working in my life again. And so I was able to open up to God and start praying a lot earlier than most people do in sobriety. So the obsession to drink was lifted very early on for me. But I didn't have a driver's license at the time, and this guy lived in Rush County. His name's Dave, and I couldn't work the steps with him. So I met a guy, and lo and behold, he went to the same church. He talked to my sponsor unknowingly to me and said, hey, Jolie really needs to get in this step 5. He's staying sick in his secrets, like Rick said. And so then again, I saw God working in my life, so Dave's like, absolutely, we need to get this done, because originally the first 100 people of the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program, when you went into an AA meeting, they worked steps 1, 2, and 3 the very first night. They'd pull you out of a different room, and so they treated the spiritual malady of the program, of the disease, very early on in a person's sobriety, and that's not really the case today.
Okay.
So when I was scared to do step 5, like I said, and that's the basis of my alcoholism and drug addiction is fear and shame. I'm a fear-based, shame-based alcoholic. I'm afraid of dying, and I'm scared to tell anybody the the things that I did, basically.
Yeah.
And that'll keep us in the bits of alcoholism, and that's what did me, and I didn't know a way out. I tried quitting on my own and several other different things, and even going to a counselor like you guys talked about in your opening, and it just didn't work for me.
Oh.
So when I got introduced to the 12-step program, and when I I did my fearless moral inventory like Rick said, I left out a couple things, and lo and behold, God worked again in my life. I was leaving a meeting to get ready to go do my 5th step, and a friend of mine that took me to that very first meeting called me and he said, "What are you doing today?" I said, "Man, I'm getting ready to go do my 5th step." And he goes, "Oh, yeah?" He goes, "Well, you know those things that you were going to take to your grave with you?" And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "Are they on there?" And I said, "No." And he said,
It must be
"You better
universal.
put them on there or you're going to drink again and you're going to die."
Wow.
And here I am.
Yeah.
I'm a fear-based alcoholic, scared to die
Yeah.
because I don't know the forgiveness of Jesus.
Yeah.
I don't know that he died and rose again on the 3rd day to forgive me of the wreckage of my past, see? And that's what we got to clean up through doing this step and telling someone else what we've done.
Yeah, so you've had a couple messengers show up and speak to your
Absolutely.
fear, a counselor and a friend. And so when you left those things off the list, that was intentional. You hadn't forgotten them. They
No,
were lodged deep
absolutely
within
not.
you, and
Those
you're just like,
were-
no, I'm not going to do it.
Those were the 2 things that I drank more over and used more substances and did
Wow.
I kind of all kinds of problems. I have an addictive behavior, addictive mentality, and I used all kinds of different things to numb that, and I combined them all together. So I wasn't just drinking.
Yeah.
I wasn't just doing drugs. I would put it all together. I have a bad case of moreism. I want more of everything, whether it's food or drugs or alcohol or whatever.
Yeah.
So by writing all that down and by telling this guy everything that I'd done, I just wrote it all out like a book, and it took like 5 hours to do my 5th step. But the freedom that I felt from that, of the first time I'd ever told anybody those 2 secrets, was just unbelievable.
Well, Jolie, I want to ask you 2 more questions. I want to ask you about that freedom for sure. But before we get there, you talked about like the fear and the fear of doing these steps, and that you were able to overcome that fear. It sounds like part of that was because one of your friends helped you by giving you that call and saying, "Hey, do this for real." I'm wondering what else helped you get over that fear, because being afraid of this sounds very natural to me. Like, this is scary stuff. So what else helped you overcome that fear?
Well, the guy that I worked the steps with, he asked me, he's like, "What are you afraid of?" I said, "Man, I lost my dad when I was a kid. Death has just plagued me my whole entire life." And I said, "Man, I'm scared of dying." And he told me right there in his truck, he said, "You need to get saved." And I was like, "Oh, wow." So then I started, I knew what saved mean as a kid. I knew what baptized mean. And so I started, one of my go-to guys is an old school pastor, evangelist named Billy Graham.
Yeah.
And
Pretty famous.
So I started listening to Billy Graham and people like that, and started reading other things other than the 12-step books. And so I just dove down deep. And when I saw that Jesus was the main focus of what I call my higher power today, and I saw that I could be forgiven from my past, that's what made me open up and be able to tell him everything that I'd done, And so I got over that fear of dying. I've since gotten baptized, and I've said the sinner's prayer with Billy Graham. I try to repent of my knowing sins, and I also ask God the Father to forgive me for my unknowing sins, because we're so unpure and unholy in front of God. Our best works are but filthy rags laying down in front of him. So we unknowingly commit sins throughout the day.
Absolutely.
So I got to lay it down and say, "Hey, God, I'm so unholy in front of you that I got to ask you to forgive me for things that I didn't even know I did."
Yeah, so you had spiritual advice, you had friend, you had God, you had a circle of care. You had a variety of things pouring into you, getting you in the recovery journey, but especially in regards to step number 5. So you mentioned that once you told another human being about this, One, was that your sponsor? Is that who you told?
It was not my sponsor.
Okay.
Well, I told people in the beginning of my recovery I was so sick that I needed 2 sponsors.
Okay.
And it wasn't really that. It was because I wanted to tell one guy something and him tell me something different than the other guy.
Okay.
And that way it was manipulation.
Absolutely.
I was a very good manipulator.
It's like a kid talking to two parents.
And I saw God in this. I saw God in this too, because both those guys both worked the program, and they both told me the same thing, and it was always the truth. They always both told me the truth about what I needed to do, and so the guy that I told the exact nature of my wrongs, he wasn't really my sponsor, but in the beginning he kind of was, because I spent a lot of time with him.
Yeah.
I didn't have a license, and he would take me to meetings, and we would do step work before and after the meetings. On the way, we would read stuff that he told me to read, and he gave me all assignments like the old school people did, and just I don't know, man.
Yeah. Well, and the book talks about it not having to be your sponsor, so I was just curious in your
Right.
specific example who it ended up being for you.
Yeah.
This is maybe another just ignorant question is, so once you do step 5 and you talk to one person, like, do you ever end up talking to a second person about the same things? Like,
Not necessarily, especially the deep darkness, the
Yeah.
ones that you're going to leave in your pocket, like Rick said. No, because what it is if you bring it back up again, Satan can use it
yeah.
to come back to you. And
So
say,
you've
"Yeah,
dealt with
Rick."
it once. You don't have to deal
Yeah,
with it
because
again.
there was a couple things, not those things, but I done another 4th and 5th step with my sponsor later on. And then later on, I done another 4th and 5th step with my grand sponsor. And he stopped me like immediately. He said, "Was this stuff and these people on your 1st and your 2nd?" I said, "Yeah." And he's like, "Why?" He goes, "You gave them to God and to another person." He's like, "That's gone. That's forgiven." He goes, "So if we ever do another one of these together, I don't want them on there again."
Okay.
You know,
Wow.
so I was just like, okay.
Yeah, that's
You
some
know,
wisdom.
So that was even more freedom. You know, further on down in my recovery, I had even more freedom from knowing that I have this guy that's been sober for, I think he's like 38 years at the time, telling me this. And I'm like, you know, I really need to, at first time in my life, I need to listen to other people. And that's where humility comes in. If I'm going to be humble, I got to be teachable. Because if I know the answer to everything, that's ego. And my acronym for ego is easing God out.
Oh, wow.
So if I ease God out of my recovery, I'm going to end up right back where I was in the beginning. Then I'm going to have to do another one of these step 5s. And it's all going to be
Don't
a
wanna do that
vicious
again.
circle,
Yeah.
you know. So
So you've talked a little bit about the freedom. You mentioned it really strongly a couple times. Is there anything else that you want to say about the freedom that step 5 brings?
well, for me personally, you know, I was going to use some scripture.
Yeah.
And so it says in Proverbs 28:13, "Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy." So today, you know, I'm seeking for God's continuous grace and mercy. So that's a big one for me. And then John 1:9 says, "If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness." You know, I've done very, very tons of unrighteous acts throughout my active alcoholism. And if it wasn't for doing this step 5, I wouldn't have any freedom at all from them. And then we just stay bonded to them. You know, they are constantly a reminder of my past. You know, the Alcoholics Anonymous book says, "I will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it." But Jesus tells us to forget the past because he's cast it into the depths of the sea, like it says in Micah, never to be brought back up again. So that's what I got to look at. That's where I get my freedom today, is more from Jesus than anything else. And that's what I constantly seek him. And the Alcoholics Anonymous book also says I have a daily reprieve contingent upon my spiritual maintenance. So I must stay spiritually fit to stay free.
Wow. Okay, so last question. You got Mount Pisgah on your shirt. That's the church you go to.
Yes, sir.
Is that also the church you grew up in?
Yes, sir.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was it like returning home to your home church in this process?
The church today, it's way bigger.
Okay.
The church that I grew up in, they have added on a sanctuary because the church has gotten larger. They do a lot for the community of Shelby County and the school systems. And so it kind of wasn't the same, but then we do a men's group once a month, and we go into the old chapel where I went to church at as a kid. And, you know, as a kid, I was sitting in church already thinking wrong thoughts,
Yeah.
and I heard fire and brimstone, and you're going to hell. So I already thought that I didn't hear the love of Jesus
Yeah.
and the forgiveness. So I was already scared,
Yeah.
scared walking around going, oh, he's seeing me do this and he's seeing me do that. But by working this step 5, I got freedom from all that, all my thoughts, all my actions, and I wouldn't have known any of this if I wouldn't have been introduced to the 12-step program. And I try to say that instead of working the steps today, I live them.
Okay.
I practice the principles of this foundation of these steps in all my affairs today. I don't want to be one of them people that goes and sits at a table and then when they leave the meeting go act like I used to and have barroom behavior.
Okay.
I want to be honest, and I don't want to be judgmental. I want to be there to help other people in any way that I can. It doesn't, even if it doesn't have to do with alcohol, drug addiction, any way that I can help another human being and do work for the kingdom, to advance kingdom work here on earth, like it says in the Lord's Prayer, on earth as it is in heaven. That's, I want to be a disciple today, and I fall short of that. And so therefore, that's one of the things that I gotta, ask for forgiveness
still working
for.
on.
I'm still work in progress, but it's practice, not perfection. Only one was perfected, and they hung him on a cross. So I got to remember, I'm not him.
Absolutely.
I'm not God. I'm not trying to play God. What I got to do is stay out of God's way and let him work through me.
Well, I think you've done a lot of good work today in sharing your story and your thoughts at this table and with the people who will be joining this conversation by seeing it on YouTube. Thank you, Jolie, for joining us, and we're going to go and take another break, and we'll be right back to wrap up our discussion.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Confession is the beginning of connection.
Welcome back as we wrap up our conversation here at The Conversation on step number 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Jolie shared so many great things with us, and he hit us with this idea that he did step 4 and 5 a couple times, maybe 3 times, and one time he got kind of told, well, you don't have to go to those darkest corners, but people do feel the need to maybe circle back to some of these steps and do them again. Can you give us a little insight to that?
Well, there's a couple things that are worth repeating that he said. The one that I thought was really fantastic was when you talked about the circle of care, and it not just having one person that is there for you. He talked about his sponsor. He talked about a grand sponsor, which is the sponsor of his sponsor. He talked about his great-grand sponsor. And that just elevates the fact that there's more than one person that he could go to. And so, for so long, I lived in isolation. And once I realized that there were people that I could trust, there was more than one person that I could talk to, there was a freedom that came with the realization that I was safe. So once I got that albatross off and I told somebody, there was a freedom there. So once I told my sponsor, I also knew that my sponsor's sponsor was a safe person. Yeah. So it was easier then to tell a second person. So there's a freedom in that, but that other person was safe. Yeah. So it was okay for me to tell that person. So there is a second layer that maybe I'll not necessarily do a 4th and 5th step all over again, but it's kind of like when Scripture says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. It's not that I'm getting saved again, but there's another person that if something comes up, it's like when he referred to, I'm a sinful being. I live in this earth. There are things even unknown to me that I do. So on a daily basis, I cover my bases. If I can use a play on words. Sure. So as those things come up, I want to address that. So if there's another person that I trust, I'm going to tell them. So it's kind of like a miniature, a mini 4th and 5th step. It's not like I'm belaboring the point. No.
And it's not because you relapse and have to start over or anything.
And we've talked, each step has a word for it. Yeah. So the word that goes with the 5th step is integrity. So I will do a mini 4th and 5th step combined, and I will say, okay, to keep my integrity, to keep my relationship with Jesus Christ in the right place, I'm going to do a mini 4th and 5th step with, okay, my sponsor's on vacation. I will do a mini fourth and fifth step with my grand sponsor.
Yeah.
I'll do a miniature, and we'll get to it. There's a reason these steps are in the order that they're in, but step 10 is continue to take inventory of ourselves. And so my continuous progress, not perfection, my continuous miniature inventory is to go ahead and do a fourth and fifth step with my sponsor, just to cover my bases.
Yeah.
So I don't put that story in my pocket or say, this is no big deal. I'm going to keep this one a secret, because we'll only stay as sick as our secrets. Put that in a dark place, because the last thing I want to do is have something raise up and bite me in the butt down the road.
Yeah. And this isn't, you don't have to go, outside your house and post a sign of your deepest, darkest secrets. You're talking to one person, two
I'm
people.
talking to somebody I trust.
This is a circle of trust. And wow, what a way to also kind of come at this from the other angle is, we need trustworthy people in this world. We need that integrity, not just in reporting our wrongs, but also that we can have the integrity that someone can come to us and we can be that trusted person.
I'm building that great cloud of witnesses of that we program that I talked about in episode 1. The people, this is my new family of people that work these steps with me. This is the we, so that I don't isolate, because I have secrets.
One, from a discipleship point of view, I mean, like, to be able to have people in your church that you can have conversations like this with, and to be the kind of church where people can bring in these kinds of things and find, not have to tell the whole church, but to find a person or two that will invest in their lives and be a disciple or with them.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that wraps up all of our time today. Rick, thank you so much for joining us again. And we want to thank Jolie again for joining us for this conversation. And we want to thank you for participating in it as well. And that will wrap up our conversation today, but we will also be back with step 6 here coming in the future. Thank you so much. This is Nick and Rick on The Conversation.